Okay, welcome everyone for day 2 of Mathew's talk on p-adic Motivic cohomology. So go ahead.
Great, thanks so much for having me back. Thanks very much to those of you who are joining again. So just to start with a very, very brief recap, I can move that up. Where are we? So start of lecture 2, last time I made some general discussion about the idea that we wanted to understand étale K-theory and relationship between K-theory and Motivic cohomology more generally. And after briefly reviewing the sort of the easy, between quotation marks, étale situation, we're now in the p-adic situation of trying to understand some very general theory of p-adic, étale, Motivic. Oh, I swapped the adjectives there, never mind. P-adic, étale, Motivic cohomology for p-complete rings, which is ultimately going to be defined as a type of symptomic cohomology of some K-theory sheaf. And today we're going to start getting our hands dirty with the technicalities to unravel this definition. So first we'll be discussing this actual quasi-symptomic site on which we're going to take the cohomology, and then we'll do some explicit calculations of K groups of a basis in this site. We'll see some crystalline period rings, and then we'll need to introduce some prismatic formalism to do more general calculations. So let me, at the end of last time, I reminded you this classical notion of a symptomic map, which is reasonably well defined. As long as you restrict to finite type maps of Noetherian rings, it means you're a flat, local, complete intersection. And one then has this result of Quillen characterizing flat finite type, which flat finite type maps are symptomic, namely they're those for which the associated cotangent complex has very small Tor amplitude, just between -1 and 0. And so where we were was we're going to write down the generalization that continues to work even if you drop, firstly, if you drop the any Noetherian and finite type conditions, and allows us to restrict to the p-complete setup. So here goes. And as last time, please feel free to interrupt by microphone anytime. So we say that a ring A is, we should really say P completely, but we tend to drop that, quasi-symptomic if, firstly, we ask that it's P complete, so it says P complete in the usual sense, p-adically complete and separated, and has bounded p-power torsion. So that is to say, all the p-power torsion is killed by some sufficiently big power of p. So this means in particular that it's going to be derived p-adically complete. And then we ask that the cotangent complex, we have to impose this, a symptomic condition now, we ask that the cotangent complex of A over ZP has P complete Tor amplitude, again in the usual range for this type of symptomic condition between -1 and 0. So this P complete Tor amplitude condition, this means that if I take my cotangent complex, which might contain lots of junk because A is p-adically complete, and I derive tensor it down to, I guess I can take any A mod P module, that'll work. I ask this be sitting in the ranges between -1 and 0, and this is for all A mod P modules M. So I don't test the Tor amplitude against all A modules, I only test it against A mod P modules. That's this definition of P complete Tor amplitude. And so then we will denote by quasi-symptomic. This is all quasi-symptomic rings. I emphasize that this is full subcategory. We allow all possible maps. It's a sort of big site, and then we'll cut down the type of maps in a moment when we discuss covers. So indeed, what we're going to do is we're going to make this into a site, or rather, we're going to make the opposite into a site. As follows, we declare covers are maps A to B. So these are arbitrary maps of rings for the moment, but both maps are both rings are quasi-symptomic. But now we impose some conditions on the map such that, so firstly, I ask that the map is P completely faithfully flat. So that means that, again, I impose a sort of usual faithful flatness condition, but I only ask it mod P. So I check B derived tensor A mod PA, and I ask that this be a faithfully flat A mod P module. So there's implicitly two conditions there. I ask firstly that this is sitting in degree, although it's a derived tensor product, I ask that it really sits in degree 0. So that's a flatness condition. And I ask that that module sitting in degree 0 is in fact faithfully flat. So that's the flatness condition on the map. And then I want to also impose a symptomic condition on the map. So I test the cotangent complex of B over A, and I ask that this has P complete Tor amplitude in the expected place, where this notion of P complete Tor amplitude is defined exactly as we did a moment ago, just up here. Any questions about the yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I have a question?
Please, please.
Could you give an example, geometric example of quasi-symptomic, which is not symptomic, please?
So you want a map which is quasi-symptomic but not symptomic. So
no, I mean, could you give an example of quasi-symptomic algebra, which is not symptomic, coming from geometry? I mean,
well, you can throw in any sort of completeness condition. I mean, as soon as you want to study p-adically complete rings, they won't be finite type over the reasonable basis. Let's suppose that I want to study, say, formal schemes over ZP. Maybe you still consider this to be geometric. Okay, so what we do then is we take what we're going to be doing in a moment is we're going to be reducing questions to the perfectoid setup. So I'll be studying certain quotients of perfectoid rings. And these will be far too big to satisfy a classical symptomic condition.
Okay, thanks.
Now you want it not to come from geometry. It's hard to say what that means. I mean, the principle is all rings come from geometry, don't they?
Yeah, but your definition at the moment looks formal and ring theoretic only, and this is why
that's in some sense the advantage of it. It makes it very easy to manipulate, and it will cover any reasonable situation that we want to see coming from geometry. But it won't be bogged down by the sort of hypotheses that you might find if you try to only restrict to obvious geometric setups.
Doesn't this naturally extend to the side of schemes where the local rings are quasi-symptomic?
Right, so as long as you're working with formals, as long as you're working with everything's supposed to be p-adically complete. So, okay, we could drop that though and work in the characteristic P setup or in the P nilpotent setup. And then indeed everything will just extend to schemes. Whereas if P is really only topologically nilpotent, then it would extend to formal schemes. So I wanted, in fact, on this, I had prepared examples anticipating such questions. So I want to remark that I think is the opposite. The answer is the opposite of the question. That this contains everything one could care about for doing geometry in most setups. This class of quasi-symptomic rings contains all regular Noetherian p-adically complete rings. And then it also contains anything that you would get by cutting out a regular sequence in such rings. And so this first statement essentially follows from Cohen structure theory, that one knows, I mean, you can reduce the local setup, and then one knows how p-adically complete regular Noetherian rings are going to look. You can construct them as power series ring modulo, usually modulo some Eisenstein polynomial, and that will satisfy this type of quasi-symptomic condition. And then we can mod out by any regular sequence, because this will again be a sufficiently symptomic operation. And so we see that somehow we have enough. I mean, we have enough to study any smooth schemes, but even some semi-stable situation, well, that's still regular. If we want to study some normal crossing devices in something smooth, this will still be covered by the quasi-symptomic formalism. But as I said, we're somehow not bogged down by we're not held back by any finiteness conditions. So what sort of covers does one care about in practice? So we're allowed to take étale covers, or rather p completions of these, if we were in some setup in which things were really p-adically complete rather than working in characteristic p. But then, and this is really the whole point of this symptomic topology, especially in characteristic p, you're also allowed to add p-throughs. So in characteristic p and p-adically, this is not going to give us an étale cover, but it will still be symptomic. And then finally, since we don't impose any sort of finiteness conditions, we can take filtered colimits of these two types of covers above, or again, rather, I include the same parenthetical remark that one will need to worry about p completing. So in particular, as long as you add, you can start with some quasi-symptomic rings, say some regular Noetherian FP algebra or p-adically complete ZP algebra, and you're allowed to construct a cover of it by compatibly adding all p power roots of all elements and p-adically completing the result. And this will then put you in a sort of perfectoid setup, which is where we're going to actually be doing explicit calculations. So let me, with that in mind, recall the goal. We're trying to compute K groups. We're trying to understand these K theory sheaves on this quasi-symptomic site. So we want to compute K groups locally. That's it. Compute K groups locally on quasi-symptomic site. And to do that, in fact, we're going to compute them on the following basis. So we say that a ring, so this is going to be we start with some quasi-symptomic ring, and we say that it is, a bit of a mouthful, quasi-regular semi-perfectoid if, so I ask firstly that mod p, I get a semi-perfect ring. So that is to say every element mod p has a pth root. And then I ask that there exists this is not part of the data, it's a condition, there exists a perfectoid ring R and a map from this perfectoid ring to S. So I realize everyone might not be familiar with perfectoid rings, so I include let me remind or tell you what these are, at least in the two most important special cases. So the definition of a perfectoid ring, so again, let me, as I say, I don't give you the most general definition. So if this is a ring of characteristic P, then being perfectoid just means that it's perfect. So that is to say, every element has a unique pth root. And if at the opposite extreme, if P is a non-zero divisor in R, then perfectoid means the following. It means firstly, R's got to be p-adically complete. Everything in this story is p-adically complete. Then it means that there exists some unit in R such that after rescaling P by this unit, I can extract a compatible sequence of P power roots of P. And then finally, the Frobenius map induces an isomorphism between R modulo the pth root of P and R mod P. So the second two conditions, so let me run over this. Some of the middle condition, this says that P itself has enough pth roots, has enough P power roots. And then the third condition, the surjectivity, right, it says that R mod P is semi-perfect. So mod P, you can extract lots of P power roots. Then the injectivity, which is implicit in condition 3, this gives you a little bit of control over the extraction of these P power roots. Although they might not be unique, it controls precisely their non-unicity. And then the first condition of p-adic completeness, this is of course required for any p-adic approximation arguments to work if you want to successively apply arguments to extract more and more P power roots. So it gives you rings with lots and lots of P power roots, but in a very controlled fashion. And in fact, any quasi-regular semi-perfectoid ring will be a quotient of a perfectoid ring. The stereotypical examples are that you take some. So I'll give you an example. So e.g., suppose I take R perfectoid, and I take F1 to FC is some regular sequence. Probably I want it to be some P completely regular sequence in a suitable sense, but let's not worry too much about that. Then if I mod out by this regular sequence, I'll get a quasi-regular semi-perfectoid ring. And those are really those in fact the only examples you need. So as I mentioned, I want to introduce these because they're going to provide a basis on which we can do calculation. Oops, another definition. They're going to provide a basis on which we can do our calculations. So let me state that precisely. So I've got these quasi-regular semi-perfectoid rings. They sit inside a class of quasi-symptomic rings, and they form a basis for this site. Try to be careful and include the opposite, since that's the way we get a site. And so let me sketch the proof of this. It's not even a sketch, it's really the full proof, just to give you some idea of how these arguments go. But just some arguments in commutative algebra. and then maybe I'll give an example afterwards of a more. Let me give you the general argument first, and then maybe we can look at a special case. So I take some quasi-symptomic ring, and then I can certainly represent it as a quotient of, well, I just take some massive polynomial algebra. And everything's p-adically completed. So I p-adically complete some massive polynomial algebra subjecting onto A. This thing is in particular a quasi-symptomic ring. And then I've got to get to something perfectoid. So I adjoin, maybe I even start with ZP. Maybe that's going to look better. Then I adjoin to ZP all p power roots of P and all p power roots of all of these variables. Again, got to p-adically complete the result, and this thing will be perfectoid. That one sees pretty easily. I've got a compatible sequence of p power roots of P, and every element has a p power root mod P. And now I just push these things out, just construct tensor these together to form what I'm going to call S. And S, you see, therefore, is, because A was quasi-symptomic, you can compute that S is also going to be quasi-symptomic. And I've got a map coming in from a perfectoid ring. It's clearly semi-perfect mod P because it's a quotient of something, semi-perfect mod P. And so it provides me an example of a quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. And I've forgotten to tell you that these things were covers. So that map on the top, one checks that it's a cover. In fact, it's a filtered colimit of these sorts of covers. And then because this quasi-symptomic site really is a site, of course, there's something to check here. You need to check in particular that push-outs of covers are still covers. But you check that, and so that tells you that this lower horizontal arrow is also a cover. And so that's produced some quasi-regular semi-perfectoid cover. But of course, some sense it's a pretty massive construction we did, because I started off by representing A as some quotient in some possibly horrendous fashion of this enormous polynomial algebra. In concrete situations, one can do a lot better. So in practice, have nicer covers, let's say. So for example, if A is a smooth K algebra, this is in reality is probably what many people care about, where K is some field of characteristic P, then I can map A to the direct limit perfection of A. So that is to say, I take the inductive limit along iterations of the Frobenius on A. So this is the universal perfect FP algebra to which A maps, and this is a cover, and this thing's even perfect. So it's certainly quasi-regular semi-perfect. So in this sort of situation where you've got a smooth algebra, or in mixed characteristic, if you've got some regular algebra, you can cook up some much smaller covers given by these quasi-regular semi-perfectoid rings. And so what we're going to do is calculate the p-adic K groups of these. And this is really going to be the key result, or at least the key local result. And then we'll have to understand what happens when we take cohomology on the quasi-symptomic side. And so let me start by giving you the simplest such case of this calculation, in which we restrict attention to characteristic P. So I take some quasi-regular semi-perfectoid ring of characteristic P. So for example, what you should really imagine is that S is equal to you take some perfect ring, some perfect FP algebra, and you mod it out by some regular sequence. Apart from the fact that regular sequences are kind of finitary in their nature, this is the prototypical example. If you understand what happens in this case, you understand what happens in general. So we imagine we've got some perfect FP algebra, and we mod it out by some non-zero divisor, or more generally, some regular sequence. Then we can just calculate the K-groups as follows. So they're going to vanish in positive odd degree. And in positive even degree, they're going to be constructed as follows. One looks at the crystalline period ring associated S that I'll define in a moment. And this comes equipped with a Frobenius endomorphism, and we'll look at we take the P to the J eigenspace for the Frobenius acting on this crystalline period ring. And that will give us a complete and more of a natural calculation of the K-groups of these types of rings. So where this A Chris is a relatively classical object, at least in small cases of S in p-adic cohomology. So this is, since everything is p-adically completed, I take the p-adic completion of the divided power envelope of the following map. So I construct the inverse limit perfection of S. This is what could be called the tilt. It's not necessarily good terminology if you start in characteristic P. So this time define things the other way around. So this is the inverse limit over iterations of the Frobenius on S. Recall that S is semi-perfect. So every element in S has a p-th root, but not necessarily unique. And so you force unicity. You construct the initial perfect ring mapping back into S. So that is, in particular, it's a perfect FP algebra. So I form it a ring of Witt vectors. That has the property that when I go mod P, I just get back the perfect ring I stuck in. And then I can map back down to S by taking projection to 0th, or maybe let's say first coordinate. Well, okay, if you view this thing as the initial perfect ring mapping to S, then I have such a map. If you view it in terms of this inverse limit construction that I've written down, then it's projection to the first coordinate. And so this gives me overall a map from this ring of Witt vectors of a perfect ring all the way down to S, and I can take the divided power envelope of this, and that gives me up to this p-adic completion issue. That gives me the crystalline period ring associated to S. At this point, I feel I should stop and ask if there are questions, because I've not heard anything in a while.
I'm just wondering how this computation related to Geisler-Levin theorem or generalized it.
So this is a good question. You can view this as a sort of derived form of Geisler-Levin's calculation. So if you start with can you really? You need some extra input. You need some extra input that might become clearer as I go through the talk. But so the short answer is that in some sense it's a derived form. If you start with the Geisler-Levin calculation, which applies to smooth FP algebras, and you left can't extend everything to arbitrary FP algebras, then this is the calculation that could ultimately be extracted. Yeah, okay. So in some sense, it's a non-abelian derived form of the Geisler-Levin calculation.
Can you say something about the history of A, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Then I'll get to Federica's question. Maybe I first answer Federica's question because that's easier. So if S is perfect itself, so for example, a perfect field, then A Chris of S, this is just going to be the ring of width vectors of S. And we get that Kn of S ZP is going to be 0. In fact, sorry, that should be N. It's going to be 0 if N is strictly greater than 0. And if N is equal to 0, because you see I won't have any Frobenius eigenspaces, and if N is equal to 0, I get like ZP, how do I write this? Like ZP to the number of connected components of S. What do I, pi 0 of spec S? What's the better? There's surely some better way to write that, but it eludes me at the moment. That's the idea. So that's, I'm not sure that the ring Geisler-Levin space is regular, but you're okay. I need to come back to Emily's question. So Chuck's question was history of AQuis. So AQuis, if you look at sort of very classical literature on p-adic Hodge theory, then the classical case is the following. So classical case of AQuis. I think maybe this will be appearing later, is the case when S is equal to OC mod P, where C is the p-adic completion of the algebraic closure of QP. So it's the p-adic complex numbers, and OC is its ring of integers. So this you see that OC is perfectoid. Since its ring of integers or something algebraic closed, it contains as many p power roots as you would like. And then I mod it out by p, that's a single non-zero divisor. So that produces for me something quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. And then A Chris, so A Chris in this case is just denoted by A Chris simply. It's the classical front ends crystalline period ring. And this construction above is then a generalization it's a generalization of that construction. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Right. No problem. So I think what I'd like to do now is, so this is just the calculation in characteristic P. As I mentioned at the beginning here, this is the key local calculation from which everything is going to follow, but it's only the necessary calculation in characteristic P. It's a complete calculation of the K groups of quasi-regular semi-perfectoid rings of characteristic P in terms of this crystalline period ring construction. And what we will see is that if we want to extend this into mixed characteristic, then we need to replace this crystalline period ring construction by an analogous output of prismatic cohomology. So it will be replaced by a sort of prismatic period ring on which we'll compute again certain Frobenius invariants and co-invariants and relate them to the K groups. But I think before getting into the mixed characteristic prismatic business, I'd like to explain to you why this is the key local theorem. I mean, how the Motivic filtration that we want in characteristic P follows from this calculation. Because then once one is in the mixed characteristic prismatic setup, it's essentially the same style of arguments once you have the local calculation. So let's now prove, as I say, let's granting this theorem, we outline proof, not all of the main theorem. So this main theorem is what I stated last time about existence of p-adic étale Motivic cohomology. As I said, let's just do the characteristic P case. So the main goal was to construct this filtration. So that is, I was claiming that for any quasi-symptomic ring, where I, as I said, I restrict, so the pen's gone a little funny. Let me restrict to quasi-symptomic rings over FP. The goal was to show that the étale K theory of A with p-adic coefficients has a complete filtration with gradients given by the quasi-symptomic cohomology with coefficients in the sheafification of the K2J pre-sheaf. Oh, and then I don't have space for the, oh, I don't quite have space for the necessary Antieau shift. Maybe you can squeeze it in. And then we'll actually calculate what these things look like and relate them to earlier constructions of p-adic étale Motivic cohomology. So step one for the construction of this filtration, I claim first that if I view my even K groups just on quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, just as pre-sheaves, there's some pre-sheaves defined on quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, what everything is, I restrict everything to characteristic P setup. These are sheaves. So quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, that's going to inherit the structure of a...
Sorry, can I have a stupid remark, please?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, if I clearly understand, QRSP quasi-symptomic are closed under direct limits of arbitrary direct limits.
Right.
Yeah, and there may be an issue, set theoretic issue, to consider sheaves on such category. So you deal with the class on the domain.
I think this. Okay, I don't see any issue in dealing with. I don't see any issue in saying what a sheaf is. I see there could be an issue in saying what cohomology is.
No, I mean
because you might need to allow bigger and bigger covers.
Yeah, for homological algebra, for example, if we want to construct homological algebra on pre-sheaves or sheaves on a small category,
right,
to abelian groups, this is my concern, that the domain, your category, does not look small.
But then okay, I mean, we can throw in some cardinality condition on all the rings appearing, if you like. I mean,
Yeah, this is why
some
my
standard
comment,
trick of picking
my
some inaccessible cardinal and restricting to rings with cardinality less than this. That's not going to have any major influence as far as I see.
Yeah, before, for example, dealing with homological algebra on sheaves or pre-sheaves, well, it's my just first reaction. I would fix the setup, set theoretical setup, the axioms where we, for example, do maths, yeah, and say it can be choice of universe or whatever.
I'm not qualified to say whether these issues will.
Yeah. Just
one knows these technicalities exist, and these technicalities can.
It is not the technicality. We may do maths only in a fixed axiom.
Okay.
Right. And
right. Okay.
But on the other hand,
accepted.
But on the other, my remark was mentioned as stupid. It just
no. I mean, it's correct. If one wants to be careful, it would be helpful to fix some cardinality of everything involved. I agree with that. But I think, in fact, a lot of these issues are going to disappear when I complete this sentence, because the statement is going to be that these sheaves of K groups on quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, firstly, a priori they were just pre-sheaves, but in fact they're sheaves with no higher cohomology. And so what that concretely means is that when you want to perform some cohomology calculations, you don't ever need to pass to arbitrary filtered colimits over more and more basis elements. You can stop at any finite given point. Except there's some small issue. There's some small issue when j equals 0. So let me restrict this statement to j strictly positive. And so let me quickly explain how the proof of that goes. And that should appear like a priori, that should appear like a weird statement. There's no reason in general that individual K group on any reasonable class of rings should satisfy any reasonable sheaf property without being sheafified. That's what we normally do, and certainly not why would then not expect to not have any higher cohomology groups. But that's what turns out to happen in this case. And so the reason is as follows. So for each of these quasi-regular semi-perfectoids of characteristic P, we have a short exact sequence thanks to the previous theorem describing K2J as, so I need to define this thing in a second. I've got my A cris of S. I've got my A cris of S. I have my divided Frobenius phi over P to the J minus 1, where this is certain so-called Nygaard filtration on the crystalline period ring, which you define by looking at those elements whose Frobenius is divisible by P to the J. So they define for me certain submodules inside A cris. On those, I have a well-defined map, Frobenius divided by P to the J. I have that by construction. And it's not so hard to check by some explicit manipulations in divided power envelopes that this divided Frobenius minus 1 is going to be surjective. And then thanks to the previous theorem, its kernel calculates for us precisely the K group. And therefore, if I want to prove that the first thing, the kernel, is a sheaf with no higher cohomology, it's enough to treat the other terms. You have to check that these things are sheaves with no higher cohomology when restricted to these quasi-regular semi-perfectoids of characteristic P. And then what one does is one appeals to results coming from the theory of derived Durand cohomology, which provide good technique for analyzing these crystalline period rings, and tells you in particular that these, that is to say this crystalline period ring and these steps of this Nygaard filtration on it, these have filtrations just in the usual sense of a abelian group being equipped with filtration. Even complete filtrations with gradeds equal to various divided powers of the first Andre Quillen homology of the ring. So if I write, remember that S, I mean, in general, it looks like some perfect ring modulo some regular sequence, so which generates some ideal I, and then this H1 is the co-normal bundle associated to this representation. It's just I mod I squared. And that's moreover all there is to the cotangent complex. And this sort of I mod I squared and its various divided powers are exactly what show up when you try to explicitly compute these divided power envelopes. And so one then was reduced all the way down to checking some statement about the behavior of the cotangent complex. And finally, the claim follows from the fact that the cotangent complex, say over FP, but in fact over anything, actually even has FPPF descent. So it certainly has quasi-symptomic descent in this context. And so FPPF descent. And so this descent condition that translates all the way back into this individual K2J sheaf having quasi-symptomic descent, which amounts to the same statement that the thing is a sheaf and has no higher cohomology. And that then gives us a technique to compute the cohomology of the sheaf just by check theory. If we've got some general quasi-symptomic ring, again, everything's over FP.
Sorry, can I
Please, yeah.
So you say FPPF, do you mean FPQC?
Oh yeah, sorry, I mean FPQC.
But that's true, yeah, FPQC, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, yeah, even if it's flat descent. It's flat descent in the strong sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. And so now we can proceed as follows to calculate the cohomology which interests us. I pick a cover by some quasi-regular semi-perfect ring, and I consider the check complex. Rather, I take my, okay, I'm going to take K theory of my check complex. Everything's p-adically completed as usual. Maybe we could have a name for this, and let me just call this curly C. As some, okay, some simplicial spectrum. And all these terms, all these rings that are appearing here, this S tensor S, this S tensor S tensor S, these are all in quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. That's something you just check that if you tensor together two quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, they're still going to be quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. And so what happens when we totalize this gadget? So this formally here, okay, so this not quite formally, this has filtration. I'm just going to totalize the Posnikov filtration after discarding all of the odd groups. So as I say, since all these terms appearing in the Czech complex are quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, the previous theorem tells us that all of their odd k groups vanishes. So just formally, I have a filtration then with gradeds given by the various 2J truncations. I'm allowed to discard all the odd groups. So that, as I say, is formal. Oh, sorry. So it has a filtration. So we're doing some nonsense here with steps. These are the steps of the filtration. And what are the corresponding gradeds? Well, they're just the totalization of what I get when I take even k groups everywhere. But what is this? If I totalize these even k groups over my Czech complex, this computes for me exactly the quasi-symptomic cohomology on A with coefficients in this thing which interests us, thanks to step 1. Since we know that this pre-sheaf of k groups just, in fact, becomes a sheaf when we restrict to quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, and since we know they're acyclic, I can use Czech cohomology calculations to calculate the site-theoretic cohomology of this sheaf. And so we've constructed, so as I say, so the totalization then of this Czech complex, this carries the filtration of the right form. And step 3, I claim that in fact the totalization of this thing is precisely what we want. It's the étale K theory, it's the p-adically completed étale K theory of A. And this follows from this is in fact, follows from 2 consequences. Of this rigidity theorem in a paper joint with Clausen and Mathew. So the first of these consequences states that that one can identify étale K theory with topological cyclic homology on all FP algebras. And this has, I guess it's even going to have FPQC, I get the right adjectives this time, descent, because topological cyclic homology, it's built by taking various limits from topological Hochschild homology, and this in turn, you can reduce questions about it in a formal way to Hochschild homology, which is controlled by the cotangent complex. And we've seen a moment ago that the cotangent complex is flat descent. So the same turns out to be true for this. And so what this means is that, okay, what we want to show is that if I totalize C, I get étale K theory, and this would show that star is true if we replace all k's in C by k étale. What do I mean by that? Let me go back. Maybe I can keep them both on the screen. Not quite. Suppose I went back here and I placed all of these by étale K theory. So this point I've just made is that étale K theory, it's even going to satisfy quasi-symptomic descent. So this check complex will compute for me then just the étale K theory of A. I've picked some cover, I've looked at the check complex, descent says exactly that the totalization would give me the étale K theory of A. That's if I replaced all these K theories, these quasi-regular semi-perfectoids by étale K theory. And then the second consequence of this rigidity is that, in fact, up to some issue about negative groups, this is a weird result. The K theory of a semi-perfect ring is already the same as the étale K theory. And even though they're not étale local in any sense, going to the étale K theory doesn't change anything in the case of semi-perfect rings. So secretly, back in this check complex, we were already looking at étale K theory, and then from this descent result, everything comes together and completes the proof that, to summarize this, I can compute my étale K theory of A as the totalization of the K theories of this cover associated to some quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. Then I compute all the terms occurring in this check complex, and they just, and I equip these with the Postnikov filtration, and that will produce for me then a filtration on the étale K theory, whose graded pieces are precisely this quasi-symptomic cohomology. So this is the argument that you'll find in BMS2, where we bypassed all these various identifications between different forms of K theory by just working directly with topological cyclic homology. When in fact one studies directly topological cyclic homology of quasi-regular semi-perfectoid rings, and what the theory outputs is this Motivic filtration on the topological cyclic homology. I've chosen to rephrase everything here in terms of certain calculations of K groups so that we can just keep the K theory point of view in mind throughout, and because in mixed characteristic, that's where we'll get some really nice expressions calculating K groups. So maybe in the remaining very little time, I can make a quick comment on some other. Maybe it's not even, it's 58. No, I mean, there's no point starting just anything new at 58. Then there's surely some questions. So let me stop there, having constructed the filtration on étale K theory. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's give Mathew a round of applause. Okay, and let's take some questions.
I was already in the chat. So Federico Binder, why can I say why the steps of the filtration are exactly those? Why can I truncate inside the totalization? So I'm not passing the truncation through the totalization. That's important. I'm defining the filtration. I'm defining the filtration to be the totalization of what I get by truncating inside. And that's definitely not the same as truncating outside. And that would trivialize everything. And then all that I'm saying to go from the filtration to the gradeds is, I suppose, that totalization is exact.
Okay, Federico.
Amalendu asks about H 1. I don't know when this question occurred though. I'm going to guess that it was maybe surjectivity here. But I wait confirmation before. Emelendo, is this what you were worrying about? Yes, so you're absolutely right, but it turns out that this is subjective. Like for any quasi-regular semi-perfectoid ring, you can just check by some sort of contracting operator argument. This will turn out to be subjective. Otherwise, you would have an H1, and the H1 confuses things a bit. Okay, the H1 would confuse things a bit, but it's not there. But in the mixed characteristic context, when you replace this by some sort of divided Frobenius -1 on prismatic cohomology, then there is in general an H1. And there's the question of whether that H1 at least vanishes locally. And this is what became known as the odd vanishing conjecture and is resolved by Bhatt and Scholze using prismatic techniques. So they show that at least locally on sufficiently étale local quasi-regular semi-perfectoids, even in mixed characteristic, there turns out to be no H1. But there it becomes a much deeper calculation. Here, as I say, it's just some quick argument you can do with contracting properties of the Frobenius undivided powers. But indeed it matters, because otherwise you have a complication that needs to be worried about. Martin, the FPQC descent statement for étale K theory from CMM, does it continue outside of the characteristic P context? So in that case, you'd want to replace this kind of dumb étale K theory by Selma K theory. And then, okay, so the question is, about this. I asserted that by identifying étale K theory with TC, you get that the left side has FPQC descent. But one even has a, I mean, more generally, wrong color, more generally, so K Selma has FPQC descent that you'll find in the paper of Clausen and Mathew. And I think I wanted to remark, sorry, because I was asked last time, what's the advantage of these? And I really promoted the point of view last time that in fact you shouldn't think about étale K theory, you should think about Selma K theory. And then I've gone along and given this talk about étale K theory. But for P complete A, the p-adically completed Selma K theory of A is the same as this naive construction that I've been looking at. So you could reinterpret all these statements in terms of Selma K theory, especially if one wanted to glue some story over different prime numbers. Then that's really the approach that you would want to take. But just working a single prime at a time, this simpler point of view is okay. Will I give a proof of the computation for quasi? So will I give a proof of? So will I give a proof of this? So actually, the proof I started thinking about. So will I give a proof? So Federico asked, will I give a proof of this?
You can say no.
This is actually not so bad. Characteristic P is kind of easy. So earlier there was the question, how does this compare to Geisel-Levin's calculation? And so you can do the following. You can start with the Geisel. Okay, we have this observation of Bhatt and Lüders that connective K theory is left count extended from smooth algebras. So I can start with what we could call okay, in fact, let me do the following. Let me already identify, I can skip this step. Let me already identify the left side here with étale K theory. I mean, I think it's not possible to bypass some of the rigidity results. So let me already replace the left side by étale K theory. Then one knows that this étale K theory, okay, and then I can even identify it with TC. Let me even go all the way and do that. Then one knows that this is, in fact, left can't extended from polynomial algebras. I mean, this is it's a non-abelian derived function. So it's left can't extended from, at least modulo any power of p, it's left can't extended from polynomial algebras over fp. Now, on the étale K theory of a polynomial algebra over fp, or more generally any smooth algebra over fp, we have the existing Motivic filtration. A la Vygotsky, but identified by Geisser-Levin. And what are the graded steps of this filtration? They're just the étale cohomologies of the W omega log sheaves. So now I can left can't extend this whole story, and it will tell me for free that this gadget here does come equipped with the filtration with terms given by the left can't extensions of the étale cohomologies of the W omega logs. And this then has, these filtered terms will be exactly what you want to identify on the right. And this actually will just reduce the story to doing some calculations in derived around cohomology. So I won't give a proof, but the proof does go just, you can reduce the proof just to some calculations in derived around cohomology. And then in the prismatic story, things will again be a little bit worse because you don't have any, you don't have a priori this nice sort of Geisser-Levin result in mixed characteristics. So you can't just left can't extend some existing result. You need to do some nastier calculation. But maybe I can say something about that next time.
Well, the right-hand side is not can't extended.
But it is, in fact. That's what you get if you left can't extend a étale cohomology of W omega log from smooth things.
But not a priori. I mean, you
not a priori. No, that's what you need to prove.
Yeah,
that's what you need to prove, and that's what I call just a calculation in derived around cohomology, a derived crystalline cohomology, really. But so okay, check something mod p.
Thanks, Mathew.
Yeah, that's not so. I mean, that's one. It's not super easy to check that, but I mean, you really just need to check that that when you left can't extend. But you want to check that when you left can't extend crystalline cohomology from smooth algebras, and you evaluate on a quasi-regular semi-perfectoid, that you get a-cris. And there were very special cases of that floating around in the literature, but we check it and for arbitrary quasi-regular semi-perfectoids. That's there. And then you just need to check this story is compatible with Frobenius. And none of these statements are quite obvious, but they're also not that surprising.
Sorry, can I ask? So the Milnor case theory. I mean, wait. So is this the same as Milnor case theory here, or can I identify the map? So in your KNSZP, when I map Milnor case theory to this, I mean, where does
zero.
At zero.
I mean, just because S is a ring in which every element has a pth root.
Ah.
So the Milnor case theory vanishes mod p.
Yes, you're right. Okay.
But I can.
But,
so
but somehow, I'm just wondering because you are talking about the log forms, but they are Milnor case theory. So like
right, the log, yeah. So right, so we could also. I mean, it's kind of crazy. This term on the right. So I can do the following, which will look crazy, but we can do it anyway. So I could start with the. I don't know whether this provides any sort of answer to your question, but I'm going to write it down anyway. So I could start with Milnor K theory. Let's work modulo some power. Let's work mod p, but everything extends to the mod powers of p. But okay, this is then in fact the same as algebraic K theory mod p. If I view these things as functors, let's say on smooth essentially smooth local FP algebras. Then I can left Kahn extend these. From smooth local FP algebras, I guess, to all. Oh, I'm still in the local setup. That's a bit of a pain. To all local FP algebras. I think this is not going to give any sort of reasonable answer. Okay, I mean, I can do this. So I left Kahn extend. To get some functors defined on all local FP algebras. And then I can evaluate at a local quasi-regular semi-perfectoid. And what I'll get will be this, okay, it's going to have to be mod p because I'm working mod p. That process will pick out for me this p to the j eigenspace calculating the k group. No, because it'll be sitting in the wrong degree. It'll be, sorry. It'll be sitting way down in degree. J, I want to say, yes. I don't know if this is a good answer to your question. I mean, I agree with what you say in principle that these classes, they look symbolic, but they're not symbols coming from Milnor K-theory. I know what is maybe a better answer to your question is Bloch-Kato in the L-adic context. That's a better way to think of it. No, because there the elements are really symbolic.
No, but I think
what can I say? These are
answer.
There's symbols coming from, in fact, there's symbols coming from P torsion. That's, sorry, I'm running way over my time here, but I guess on a Zoom call, people can just leave and I don't notice rather than leaving the room. So it's.
Sorry, no, but this was already.
But no, this is really important. In fact, they come from P torsion classes. So if I, rather than mod P classes, so okay, I could compute for you ZP1. So in general, ZP1 of some quasi-regular is, so just with some quasi-symptomic ring, ZP1 will be given by the étale cohomology in GM, p-adically completed, then I shift in the usual way for Motivic cohomology. So if I were to take a quasi-regular semi-perfectoid, let's say quasi-regular semi-perfect, how is this going to look? This is, in most cases, this is in fact just going to be the Tate module of the units of S. Right, if you play with some sequence, I mean, on this quasi-symptomic side, the sequence goes the opposite way to on the étale side. You can always extract pth roots. Oh no, sorry, it goes the same way as on the étale side. Right, so I don't know what to say. I mean, it's in some sense it's orthogonal. The elements are, in some sense, still symbolic, but they're not coming from mod P classes of units. They're rather coming from P torsion classes of units. I think I stopped answering the question.
Yeah. Thank you. I see. Yeah. Thanks.
Were there any questions in the chat that I didn't get to? No, I think that was all of them.
Okay, are there further questions? Okay, we have one thank you. So it seems no more questions. So thanks again, Mathew.
No, that's all. Thanks everyone for attending.
And we'll be back Friday.
Right? Friday, yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, so thanks. Goodbye.
See you then.